Blood Moon Chronicles, Chapter 32, The Echo of the Unfinished Song. The sun was setting over the coastline with an aggressive, almost violent beauty. It wasn't just a sunset, it was a bleeding wound across the horizon, staining the Pacific Ocean in shades of bruised violet and molten gold. If you had told me yesterday that I'd be sitting on the back of a roaring, chrome-heavy Harley Davidson, watching the world burn through a pair of designer aviators, I would have told you to check your brain for cosmic static. But then, I was a man who had seen his friends turn into geometry and his town turn into a buffet for skinless puppets. So, unlikely is my middle name. Actually, it's Mike, but let's not get bogged us with the semantics. The engine of the revamped Harley, a beast of a machine that Bubba had somehow rebuilt using parts that definitely didn't belong in this dimension. It wasn't just a motor, it was a living thing, vibrating with a low-frequency growl that felt like it was trying to communicate directly with my bone marrow. Rhonda sat at the helm, looking more human than I'd seen her since the blood moon first turned the sky into a slaughterhouse. Her hair whipped behind her in the wind, and despite the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes, there was a newfound sharpness to her silhouette. The infection that had once been a black, pulsing vine in her veins had retreated, leaving only thin, silver scars, reminders of a debt paid in full. "You okay back there?" Rhonda shouted over the roar of the wind and the predatory growl of the engine. I took a deep breath, the salt air filling my lungs, fighting the metallic tang of ozone that still seemed to haunt every breath I took. "Better than I deserve," I yelled back. It was a lie. I wasn't okay. My mind was a shattered mirror, reflecting fragments of Mike's hollow eyes and the terrifying, unblinking gaze of the warden. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the loop. I saw the way the world stuttered like a scratched record. We hadn't fixed anything. We had just paused it. We pulled over at a scenic overlook perched high above the cliffs. The engine gave one final satisfied chuff before dying down into a rhythmic tick-tick-ticking sound, as if it were cooling off after a fever. Bubba was already there, leaning against the chrome railing of the lookout point. He looked different. The manic, I'll-die laughing energy that had defined him throughout this nightmare hadn't vanished, it had just crystallized. He wasn't dancing anymore. He stood with a quiet, heavy stillness, watching the tide come in. "The ocean is big," Bubba said as we approached. His voice was low, stripped of its usual gravelly humor. "It's got a way of swallowing things whole and never giving them back. I think I like it. It doesn't ask for much besides silence." Rhonda climbed off the bike, stretching her limbs with a grimace. "The silence is what we're counting on, Bubba. No more whispers, no more static, just peace." "Peace," Bubba repeated, the word tasting like ash. He pulled out a cigar, but instead of lighting it, he just rolled it between his fingers. A luxury for people who aren't being hunted by their own shadows. We stood there in the dying light, a trio of broken survivors. We were supposed to be celebrating, the happy ending everyone wants in the movies. A motorcycle ride into the sunset, a clean break from the madness. But as I looked out at the vast, churning expanse of the ocean, I couldn't help but feel like we were just standing on a stage after the curtain has already closed, waiting for the audience to realize the actors are all dead. "Let's get moving," Rhonda said, her voice hardening with a sudden, inexplicable urgency. "There's a motel about 50 miles up the coast. It's nondescript, it's quiet, and most importantly, it doesn't have any pulsating meat walls." We mounted the Harley. The engine roared back to life, a defiant snarl against the approaching night. We rode through the twilight, the wind whipping our faces, the world blurring into a smear of dark blues and deep purples. For a few miles it felt real, the motion, the speed, the feeling of being somewhere else. We reached the motel just as the first stars began to pierce the veil of the sky. It was a classic roadside dive, weathered wood, neon signs that hummed with a sickly yellow light, and an air of profound loneliness. "This is it," Rhonda said, killing the engine. "Temporary sanctuary." We checked in with a clerk who looked like he had been carved out of old leather and bad intentions. He didn't look at us, he just handed over a heavy brass key and pointed toward room 12. No pleasantries, no smiles, just the transactional silence of people who have seen too much to care about hospitality. The room was small, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and stale tobacco. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the springs protest under my weight. My mind kept drifting back to Mike. He was gone, lost to the pocket dimension, a victim of the very reality we had tried to mend. Every time I closed my eyes, I wondered if he was still out there, caught in a loop of his own, screaming into the void where no one could hear him. "You think we'll be okay?" Rhonda asked from the window. She was watching the parking lot, her silhouette framed by the flickering neon sign outside. "I think," I said, looking at my hands, "that we've done everything we can. The loop is broken. Victor is somewhere else. We're just living our lives now." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Late that night, the silence grew heavy, not a peaceful silence, but an expectant one. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of my own breathing. In, out, the pattern of survival. Then I heard it. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't a car on the highway. It was the hiss click, the static. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sat up, my hand instinctively reaching for the heavy iron wrench I still kept under my pillow. The room was dark, save for the rhythmic, sickly yellow glow of the motel sign bleeding through the curtains. "Rhonda?" I whispered. "Bubba?" No answer, just the sound of the ocean in the distance and the low hum of the refrigerator in the corner. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of water. I walked toward the door, my hand trembling on the knob. Slowly, I pushed it open. Rhonda and Bubba were standing by their window looking out at the parking lot. They didn't turn around when I approached. "What is it?" I asked, stepping into the hallway. "Is it them? The shadows?" Rhonda turned. Her face was deathly pale in the neon light. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me, toward the edge of the parking lot where the darkness met the scrubland. "It's not the shadows, Mike," she whispered. Her voice was so thin it barely existed. It's something else." I followed her gaze. At the edge of the property, just where the light of the street lamp failed to reach, something was moving. It wasn't a shapeshifter. It wasn't a werewolf or a vampire. It was a figure tall, unnaturally thin, and wearing an impeccably tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the very light around it. The man stood perfectly still. He didn't breathe. He didn't even seem to exist in the physical plane. He looked like a hole in reality, a glitch that had finally decided to settle into place. "Is that him?" I breathed, my blood turning to ice. "Victor?" But as the figure raised its head, we realized it wasn't Victor. The face was wrong. It was too smooth, too perfect, like a doll that had been carved from marble by someone who had never actually seen a human being. And beneath the skin, I could see something moving, a frantic, swirling mass of grayscale static, pulsing in time with an invisible heart. The figure didn't attack. It didn't lunge. It just pointed. Slowly, the figure pointed toward the ground beneath our feet, toward the motel, toward the very earth we had thought was finally safe. "He's not coming for us," Bubba said, his voice a hollow shell of its former self. He stepped out into the night, his eyes wide with a realization that hit harder than any physical blow. "He's coming for the Foundation." Suddenly, the ground didn't just tremble, it screamed. A sound erupted from beneath the motel, a massive tectonic groan of breaking concrete and snapping rebar. A fissure, glowing with a sickening rhythmic red light, ripped through the center of the parking lot, splitting the asphalt like a piece of wet paper. "Get back!" I yelled, lunging for Rhonda. But it was too late. The ground didn't just split, it opened, not into a hole but into a mouth. A massive, yawning chasm of pulsing muscle and jagged teeth that seemed to extend infinitely downward into the crust of the earth. The motorcycle we had ridden in on, the one Bubba had rebuilt with such strange cosmic parts, was suddenly caught in the maw. It didn't just fall, it was digested. The metal shrieked as it was crushed, and for a fleeting second, I saw the glowing red symbols of the loop etched into the very walls of the abyss. The figure in the black suit vanished, not into shadow, but into nothingness, leaving behind a single, chilling echo that Vive's been playing on a loop in our minds since the beginning. "The harvest is never over," It only changes hands. As the motel room began to slide toward the abyss, as Rhonda screamed and Bubba lunged for her hand, I realized the truth. We hadn't escaped the cycle. We had just moved from being the prey to being the architects of our own destruction. The world tilted, the light turned to static, and then there was only the sound of the ocean, mocking us with its endless rhythmic tide. This concludes Season 1 of the Blood Moon Chronicles. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you soon, my friends.